Welcome to the 2024 Year Ahead Horoscope for Sagittarius Sun and Rising. Now, I've written this horoscope specifically for Sagittarius Rising, but of course you can watch it from your sun sign or any other sign or placement that you want to. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started. First off, I just want to go over the major transits of 2024. Now, I already did a general 2024 overview, so if you want to know a little bit more about how I look about this in a mundane way, go ahead and check that out. But the main things that we have got going on is one, Pluto is ingressing into Aquarius. We get two of these. The first one is on January 20th, and Pluto will stay in Aquarius for the majority of the year. It will go back into Capricorn in September. It will stay there for 2 months, and then it will permanently move into Aquarius on November 19th. And when I say permanently, I mean the next 2 decades. So, yeah, that's quite a big shift. Then we have the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction on April 20th. This is, in my opinion, the best transit of the year, the most exciting. It should be pretty good for you guys. I mean, I'm a Sag rising, so we're ruled by Jupiter. So this should be pretty good. We'll talk more about it. Jupiter is entering Gemini on May 25th. So this is all about relationships for us. And then Venus, we're going to have a Venus Cazimi in Gemini also on June 4th. So a lot of June, like the late spring, early summer is like really focused on relationships. We'll talk a lot about that. And then throughout the year, we get 2 squares from Jupiter and Saturn. Now, this is kind of the more long-term, big meta transit that we have throughout the year. Technically, we get 3 Jupiter-Saturn squares, but the third one happens in 2025, and they're in different zodiac signs. But the first one we get is August 19th, and the second is December 24th. This is like, okay, Jupiter's going to go into Gemini in your 7th house, whoop-de-doo, but that comes with caveats, and the caveat is it's going to square Saturn. So there are some restrictions here that we will talk about. And then arguably the worst part of this year is the Mars retrograde in both Leo and Cancer on December 6th. The best way to understand 2024 is to think of it as a build up to 2025. 2025 is when all the action happens, and this Mars retrograde facilitates that. Like Mars will only be retrograde for like the last month, but it'll be retrograde for the majority of the beginning of 2025. And of course, we will talk about that once we get to 2025. But anyway, before we get started, make sure you like this video if you like the content. Comment, let me know what your favorite month is going to be, what month you are least looking forward to. Also, if you want to keep up to date with all of the transits throughout the year, make sure you subscribe. And also, if you want to get a notification whenever a planet or a transit is hitting one of your natal placements, go over and go to my website and download the transit calendar. As you can see here, these little orange ticks are little updates of when a transiting planet is hitting one of my personal placements in my birth chart. I can click it. It's going to tell me what day and what time, and I can click it and it's going to tell me an interpretation of it. I absolutely love it. It's only $20, available over on my website, and it helps support the channel. I think you guys will like it because I really like it. And of course, if you want to get more in depth about what this year and even 2025 is going to look like for you, feel free to book a consultation with me in the link in the description below. So let's go ahead and get started with January. So January, we're starting the year off on January 1st with Mercury stationing direct. I think this is exciting because December 31st is when Jupiter stations direct. And then by the 1st, Mercury stations direct. Now all planets are direct. They're moving forward. This is just a nice little forward movement feeling happening at the very beginning of the year. Now, Mercury retrograded in December of 23 in your 2nd house of money, finances, and resources. But it went into shadow and it retrograded back into your 1st house of you, your body, yourself, your image, your identity. So there might have been like some delays or reconstruction or reconfiguration with money and finances, and kind of based off your own, like, not personal ignorance, but just kind of like having too high of expectations possibly. Mercury does rule your 10th house of career and 7th house of relationships. So there might have been some miscommunications regarding that area or delays regarding those areas that might have messed up some money. And this is just when you get a little bit more clearer idea of what you're doing, and there's no more delays, no more miscommunications. Everything gets worked out and we're ready to go forward. Then on January 4th, we have Mars ingressing into Capricorn. And I'm going to pull up the chart for all of this here in just a moment. But one thing to understand that will help you watch this horoscope a little bit better is knowing if you're a day chart or a night chart. Now, if you were born in the day, which means the sun is above the horizon, so it's above the ascendant and the descendant, that means you're a day chart. And if it's below it, it's a night chart. Now, why this is important is this is going to differentiate which planets are better or worse, or which planets are more on our team and not on our team. So when we talk about the malefic planets, this is Mars and Saturn. If you are in a day chart, Mars is much more destructive and not as fun in your chart, and Saturn is a lot more on your side. Versus if you're a night chart, Mars is more on your side and Saturn is a little bit more not on your team, a little bit more difficult to deal with. So keep that in mind as we go through this. But Mars goes into Capricorn. Why this is good is Mars is exalted in Capricorn. So Mars does really, really well in Capricorn. Mars is about fights, conflicts, energy, ambition, and drive. And it's exalted, so it's very strong. It's very capable. Only issue is that Mars likes to burn things, and it's going through your second house of money, possessions. So this might be burning through cash more, spending a lot more money. But this should be good for like accumulating wealth, or at least working with what you have and working hard to make more money, essentially. So we've got that going on. And then Pluto ingresses into Aquarius on January 20th. Now, we've already had Pluto ingress into Aquarius once in 2023. Pluto moved into Aquarius between March of 2023, and then it retrograde back into Capricorn in about May and June of 2023. So I want you to think about that time and think about the vibe shift that occurred. Now, I'm a Sagittarius rising, and I've somewhat struggled trying to put the pin on exactly what this has looked like. And I think a lot of the reason is it's the third house. The third house is a weird area. I call it the junk drawer of the chart. It rules short distance travel, siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors, your local community, not like friends that, can live in different states or countries, but like literally your neighborhood. It rules how you utilize the knowledge that you have. How do you apply it? It rules primary education. It rules technology and communication. And so there's kind of a lot going on here. Now, Pluto rules power, fear, corruption, transformation. And the big thing is, in this video, I am not going to be able to cover exactly what Pluto in Aquarius is going to look like for you because it's a 20-year-long transit. You could like a blanket statement, though, is Pluto is going to transform the area of your third house. So again, siblings, neighbors, short distance travel, you're going to have to put that into a context of your own life for it to make sense. But as Pluto goes in here, like it's just checking in with the vibe shift. Like I think the biggest thing that I noticed was, Pluto leaving my second house of money, finances, and resources, and there being less fear and more empowerment with money, like less pressure on money. And there felt to be more pressure on neighborhood and community and siblings and things like that. So you're going to want to check in and see how it's going to be for you. But that leads us to February, because in February, it's all third house stuff. Now, again, it's the junk drawer of the chart. I'm going to give you all the description of what it all represents, but you're going to have to put the pieces together to figure out how exactly it's going to affect you in your life. I need some water. 1 second. So Mars goes into Aquarius, and Mars conjoins Pluto. This is our first big highlight of February. Again, third house, siblings, neighbors, short distance travel, communication, technology. And Mars conjoining Pluto just seems like a revolt. Mars conjoining Pluto seems like a revolution, a rebellion of some sort, where there's a drastic change in things. Meaning, if Mars is inflammation, separation, cutting, fights, conflicts, energy, drive, and this is going into your third house, there seems to be like a really active, chaotic time related to your neighborhood, your community, maybe even siblings. Maybe something happens with one of your siblings or your cousins or aunts, uncles, whatever it is. But Pluto is both like transformative, but also, power. And it's a two-way street with power, where it could be so powerful that you get scared, or you like bring up the power on yourself. Now, Mars rules your 12th house of hidden enemies, isolation, alienation, subconscious, fears, and phobias. But Mars also rules your 5th house of love, romance, sex, pleasure, art, music, and recreation. So that planet that rules both of those houses conjoining Pluto in the third is like, part of me wonders how much of it is like utilizing knowledge that you have for a creative endeavor, and possibly even doing a little bit of self-sabotage, and just having like some general fears around maybe the people that are around you, or problems with the people that are around you, problems with vehicles. That would be something to look for. And again, this is like really, you're talking to a professional astrologer, and this is literally like my rising sign. Like I'm struggling putting the pieces together with Pluto in my third house as of right now. I will say typically with like outer transits, like outer planet transits, it's easier to understand in hindsight anyway. So that happens. But then right after that, on the 17th, Venus will conjoin Pluto, and Venus will ingress into Aquarius, into your third house. Now, this is definitely a vibe shift because Mars is fights and conflicts, right? Energy, drive, ambition. So maybe you're just doing a lot more short distance travel, or there's a lot more problems with, neighbors and siblings. But then Venus comes along, and Venus is about fun. Venus is about connection. This is all in Aquarius, so we are talking about like society and people and technology and things like that. There's a lot of collapsible ideas with the third house in Aquarius, anyway. But as Venus conjoins Pluto, this is number one, pleasure and fun having some sort of a corrupted or a corroded aspect to it. Like it is hard to, enjoy things because of the area that you're in or the people that you're around, or the things that you do enjoy get corrupted to where they're no longer enjoyable. Now, the other way to look at this is empowerment. Now, Venus does rule your 11th house of friends and community, and the South Node's been there. So there's been a kind of like slow draining of friends and moving on from certain friendships and certain groups. And as Venus conjoins Pluto in the third, there might be a lot more empowerment with the people that are closest to you, like the people literally in your neighborhood, not just so much of people, that you've been friends with forever and that live everywhere. But Venus also rules your 6th house of work, habits, health, routine, and there seems to be a real power switch there. So again, as you're watching this throughout the year, comment below and let me know what ends up happening for you during this time, because I'm really curious. But then right after that, on the 22nd, Venus conjoins Mars again in your 3rd house. Now, the difference with this is now that they're both away from Pluto, the pressure is really off. But something to look at is your 11th ruler of friends is conjoining your 12th ruler of hidden enemies and self-sabotage and isolation, alienation in your 3rd house of, again, neighborhood, community, short distance travel, siblings, neighbors. And it's also your 6th ruler of work, health, routine, day-to-day activities, conjoining your 5th ruler of love, romance, sex, pleasure, art, music, and recreation. And that's still in your 3rd house. So these two topics are going to become very like, I don't want to say abundant, but like, they're going to be much more in your face regarding the things that you're doing. The 6th house is more of habits, but the 3rd house can also be like your schedule in terms of like running errands and doing day-to-day things. So there's a lot of energy going on here. Maybe it's a lot of fun energy, a lot of creative stuff that you're incorporating into your habits. Maybe it's also hanging out with people that maybe you shouldn't be hanging out with. I don't know. Like it's really complicated, but I think the pressure is off now that Pluto is there, and it's much more of and Mars and Venus are like, it's both not fun and fun. Mars is fights and conflicts and Venus is fun. And sometimes the drama or, being able to complain about something can be like fun at times. That's how I'm interpreting this. But then we get to the 27th and the 28th. And this is when we get the Mercury and Saturn cazimi. Now, every planet goes cazimi at least once a year. With Mercury, we get about 6 to 8 cazimis. And Saturn, we get about 1 a year. And what a cazimi is when the sun either conjoins a planet or a planet conjoins the sun. And the way I like to interpret it is like, it's like this planet's birthday. It is resetting the topics of that planet for its next synodic cycle, which is the next time it conjoins the sun. So we're going to talk about Mercury for a second, but let's talk about Saturn. Because Saturn is now in Pisces. And if you haven't watched my Saturn and Pisces video already, I'd make sure to check that out if you want to know exactly what it's going to mean and look like for you for the next couple of years. But Saturn is about responsibility, maturity, discipline, restrictions, and all that stuff, right? And since March of last year, Saturn has been in your 4th house of home, family, living situation, and parents. So there's been more responsibility, there's been more restrictions, there's been more discipline that's had to happen here. Especially because Saturn rules your 2nd house of money and your 3rd house of like even things like roommates and neighborhoods. That's been a big part of your living situation quarrel. Now, from March to June of 2023, Saturn was moving direct, where I've been using this analogy in every single horoscope. So, sorry if I'm just repeating myself here, but Saturn moving into a new sign and going direct is like you start a new job and you were getting on the job training. People are showing you around. Hey, this is what you're going to do. This is how this works, X, Y, and Z. And then from June of 23 to November of 23, Saturn was retrograde. This is like, okay, you're not being trained by someone anymore. You're kind of on your own and you're still working out the kinks. You're still figuring out what you're responsible over, how to work within and navigate the system. Again, all of this is about your living situation. And then from November of 2023 till about here, Saturn moved direct, but it was still in its shadow. It was still in that space in the sky that it went retrograde over. So this is feeling much more comfortable of what your responsibilities are. It's like, all right, you're like 3 months on the job, 4 months on the job. You know what you got to do. You feel a little more comfortable with your responsibilities, your duties, your obligations, and what your limitations are. But when we get to the Saturn Cazimi, this is a new chapter. This is resetting these topics, and now Saturn's going to move direct and is going to introduce more new things that you'd have to be responsible for, that you need to be mature and disciplined over. So that's what the Saturn Cazimi is like essentially, hey, we're starting new topics related to home and family and living situation and what your responsibilities and restrictions are. Now, there's also a Mercury Cazimi, and this is where I want to pull up the chart. Now, Mercury Cazimis, again, we get a lot of them, but Mercury is in detriment in Pisces. Mercury doesn't do all that well in Pisces, meaning, a Mercury Cazimi is like some sort of a notification, some sort of a message that is being received, some sort of an idea that happens. And like, let's say you receive some sort of a message, some sort of a text, it's in Pisces. There's something about it that's still not clear. Now, Mercury rules your 10th house of career, and the Cazimi is in your 4th. So this might have to do with career topics related to home and family and living situation. That's like, oh, this is the clear moment, but the message you receive isn't. It's also about your 7th house of relationships. So this might involve a parent, a family member, but there is some sort of significant relationship, maybe even a 3rd house person like a neighbor, that there's some sort of line of communication. There's some new start here that is, again, where this communication is supposed to be clear, it's not. So that brings us to March. So January is very hustle grind. We get a lot of things in Capricorn. February is very like local community, kind of the same thing though. Excuse me. But then March is where things start getting weird. The first thing we have is Mars squaring Uranus. This is on March 9th. And this is happening in your 3rd house and your 6th house. The 3rd house, again, rules like communication. And the 6th house rules things like work and labor, routine and health. Now, Mars, being in your 3rd house is like doing its best to do everything that's got to do day to day, feeling a little bit disconnected, a little bit jaded. But as Mars squares Uranus, this is some sort of an upheaval. This is some sort of a chaotic moment. You know, Mars does rule your 12th house of self-sabotage, isolation, alienation, hidden enemies, and it's in your 3rd house of, you know, routines, day-to-day activities. I know that is a 6th house thing, but it's also kind of a 3rd house thing. This is where the third house is just a weird area. But it is squaring Uranus, which is in your 6th house of health, work, labor. And there seems to be like some disruption here, like some chaotic disruption that happens that isn't all that fun. Like you decide to push the big red button, or you decide to do something that is very self-sabotage like, that causes a lot of chaos regarding your schedule, your work, and things like that. So expect a major disruption on March 9th with those areas. This might even be a fight or a conflict with a neighbor or a sibling. Then we get to March 11th, and this is when Venus ingresses into Pisces. Now, what I like about this is Venus is exalted in Pisces. So Venus does really, really well in Pisces. Venus is about love, you know, connection, indulgence, bringing people together, relationships. And she's entering your 4th house of home and family and living situation and parents. And why I like this is now that Saturn's been there, Saturn has created a lot of pressure and a lot of heavy weight and restrictions regarding your living situation. But Venus comes in and you can still have fun with it. Like a lot of the times when Venus transits your 4th house, it's like buying new furniture or redecorating. Like that's a total Venus in 4th house transit. This time I would imagine it's a little bit different just because Saturn's there. So it's like, you know, okay, what are my necessities? What do I absolutely need? This might involve some sort of a friend thing, or it might involve even like redoing your workspace or your office space. But Venus going to your 4th house is like, even though you have bigger responsibilities and obligations regarding living situation, home and family, at least you can have some more fun here and make it more beautiful and enjoyable. Then on March 18th, Mercury enters shadow. So this really begins the process of the craziness that's April. A lot of crazy things are happening in April. And we're going to have like an eclipse. There's just a lot of crazy stuff, right? But Mercury will go retrograde at some point in your 5th house of creativity, love, romance, sex, pleasure, children, hobbies, art, music, recreation, and self-expression. So when Mercury enters shadow, pay attention to the 18th, because there's something about that day you're going to come back to. This might be an idea. This might be a communication that is given to either, someone tells you or you tell them that you are going to come back to, because there will be some delays. There will be a rethinking or a reviewing of this fifth house area, which is, again, what do you want? What do you want to pursue? And the big thing is, the North Node is in your fifth house. There's a lot of hunger and urge to go in this area, to explore this area of what you want and desire and love and romance and sex. So as Mercury enters shadow, that's going to come up. But then by the time we get to the 25th, this is when we have our lunar eclipse in Libra. Now, this is happening in your 11th house of friends and networks and communities. However, this is starting eclipse season, which eclipse season is like the craziest 2 weeks out of 6 months. Like, there's an eclipse typically every 6 months, and it's just the craziest time, and this one starts it. Now, we had a solar eclipse in Libra back around October 12th, 13th, 14th. I want you to think about what happened during that solar eclipse and what shifted, because there's something about that that's going to come back up very relevantly here on March 25th. Now, the big thing here is, lunar eclipses. Well, this is an eclipse on the South Node. So a lot of this is draining and exhausting, maybe moving on from friends, and a lot of us have our midheavens in the 11th house too. So a lot of this can deal with careers topics, but moving on from certain friends and realizing that maybe you don't like them, or, certain parts of our identity, because again, the midheaven might be there. And, just being like, wanting to move on from something, wanting to get rid of something, and whatever seed was planted around that October time, comes to fruition here. So we get that, and now we're in the middle of eclipse season, and that brings us to April, where then on April 1st, Mercury goes retrograde in your fifth house: creativity, love, romance, sex, pleasure, children, art, music, recreation, hobbies. Okay, so Mercury goes retrograde. There's now a delay here. There's now a rethinking. There's a reviewing. There's a miscommunication. There is a mishap related to this area. We are now rethinking. What do you want? What do you do for fun? What is pleasurable for you? What do you enjoy? It also rules drugs and alcohol. So maybe you're looking at this area of your life. Now, what's interesting is Mercury does rule your 10th house of career, and it also rules your 7th house of relationships. So a big part of this could be career things, career topics related to creativity, and even relationships related to love and romance. Like, what do you even want? And maybe you're talking to someone. Maybe you meet someone around this time, which is important because there's a bunch of relationship stuff happening for you guys. But then we get the solar eclipse in Aries. So I argue, I think solar eclipses are bigger deals than lunar eclipses. This is happening on the 8th. And again, in your 5th house of creativity, love, romance, sex, pleasure, art, music, recreation. And this is a real big door opening or closing regarding this 5th house. So this might even be a pregnancy. This might be, new passion project. This might be new hobby. Again, as you watch this, let me know in the comments below what ends up happening. But this eclipse in your 5th house is a really big reset when it comes to love, romance, sex, pleasure, art, music, recreation, children. And it's on the North Node. It's like, I want to pursue this thing. This is what I'm going after. This is what I want. Now, why this eclipse is so wild is because 2 days later, on the 10th, is when Mars conjoins Saturn. Now, this eclipse is in Aries, so it is ruled by Mars. And Mars conjoining Saturn is typically always a big deal. But the fact that it's happening on this eclipse is very auspicious. And this is happening in your 4th house of home, family, living situation, and parents. Now, the easiest way to understand a Mars-Saturn conjunction was when we had lockdowns. That was a Mars-Saturn conjunction. Saturn rules governments and authorities, and Mars rules separation and cutting. And they both ingress into Aquarius relatively at the same time, literally on the day of the lockdown. And this was in Aquarius. Aquarius rules like society and people. And it was literally like the government says separate yourself from people. There was a little bit more to the whole COVID thing than that, but it was a really interesting signature for lockdown. Now, this is happening regarding your 4th house of home and family and living situation. There's a lot of intense heaviness related to home and family. This is your 12th ruler of hidden enemies, isolation, alienation, the subconscious, fears and phobias, as well as your 5th house of love, romance, sex, pleasure, art, music, and recreation. And it's conjoining your 2nd house ruler of money and your 3rd house ruler of community, neighbors, short distance travel. And both of those topics are coming together in your living situation. So this is a lot of frustration. And again, both malefics are in your 4th house. A lot of heaviness, a lot of just again, lockdown energy, like serious energy of like, what's mine to do? What do I do next? Kind of a thing. So that happens, and April is very wild. And now you can categorize these as bad transits, but what's so funny is immediately after that, we get the best transit of the year on 420, very easy day to remember, and Jupiter conjoins Uranus. Now this is happening in your 6th house of work, health, routine, pets, day-to-day activities, coworkers, employees, and this is like striking gold. This is like number one, you're ruled by Jupiter. So Jupiter is whatever Jupiter's doing is a bigger deal for you than usual, than for most people. And it's in your 6th house of health, work, routine, day-to-day activity. So there's been a lot of focus on that since May of 2023. Jupiter in Taurus has been like, hey, slow is smooth and smooth is fast, like really focusing on value, really focusing on getting the most out of it, not really being too concerned with speed, but being more concerned with like the value and the quality. Now, as you've been focused on work, health, routine, as Jupiter conjoins Uranus, there's some sort of a liberation or a breakthrough, albeit there's a possibility for injury here. Your ascendant ruler on Uranus in the 6th is like, oh, I accidentally got injured. I accidentally fucked myself up. But Jupiter conjoining Uranus seems like because Uranus is innovation, technology, breakthroughs, instability, unpredictability, ups and downs. And Jupiter is the planet of abundance and fortune and good faith. And it's conjoining Uranus in your 6th. So this seems like to me, like there's some sort of breakthrough with health. There's some sort of breakthrough with your work or getting a better job. It's also 4th house related. So this is your 4th ruler of home and family and living situation conjoining Uranus, where there is some sort of like, again, unstable, random event occurrence that happens that influences your work and your health and your routines. I would argue in a positive way. So this is all during this eclipse season. April is really, really wild. And then it gets turned up a notch. By the time we get to April 30th, Mars ingresses into Aries. Now, Mars rules your 5th house of creativity, love, romance, sex, pleasure, children, art, music, recreation, and hobbies. And as Mars enters your 5th house, right, we're going to get more activation there. But Mars is in its domicile in Aries, meaning it works really, really well there. And so it's your 5th ruler transiting your 5th house. So we're doing a lot of 5th house activities, having fun, doing recreational sports, sex, love, and romance. All that is turned up, to the maximum. Think about like May and June of 2022, because that was the last time we had Mars go into Aries. And what was going on during that time? Were you being more creative? Were you, more sexually active, whatever that is? And the other thing is the North Node is now here. And so not only is this whole area going to be a lot more intense anyway, it's going to get cranked up to 11 with the North Node, because that's what the North Node does. And so there's like a heavy pursuit, a heavy, like just, I got to do this, I got to do that, I want this, I want that energy happening at the end of April. And Mercury is still on the North Node here, because Mercury goes into shadow and stations direct on the North Node. So again, a lot of action and energy going on here. So then that brings us to May. So then we get to May, and I'm going to argue that May is the best month of the year. Honestly, for the Sag risings, it might be June, but let me explain. Before I go over this list, let me just show you the chart. The reason why I think May is so good is, look, we have Venus and the Sun and Uranus and Jupiter all in your 6th house. We have both of the benefic planets in the sign of Taurus, which Venus rules. We have the Sun here, which is arguably a benefic, and Uranus could be good or bad, but if it's hanging out with Venus and Jupiter, it's going to be good. There's all of this really good stuff going on with work, health, day-to-day activities, pets, just a lot of like soaking in the good, if that makes sense. Like Taurus is like laying in under a sunny tree on a spring day, eating good food. Like your 6th house is just rocking and rolling here. So I really, really like that. But as we get into May, the first thing that we have going on is on May 13th, Mercury leaves shadow. Again, still 5th house stuff. Now, Mercury enters shadow on March 18th, and it leaves shadow May 13th. So we got almost 2 months of all of this 5th house activity, and it doesn't even stop there. At least just with Mercury leaving shadow, it's like all of these things that we had to slow down on, that there were delays and we had to restart. That's all over and done with at this point. We're moving on to new mental territory. But then on the 19th, Mars is going to conjoin the North Node. And like I said, when Mars ingresses into Aries, it turns it up. But then like what this is 3 weeks later, pretty much, it really gets cranked up. We're really focused on creativity, love, romance, sex, pleasure, children, hobbies. Now, this is Mars, so this could be fights and conflicts. This can be irritation and irritability. This could also just be a lot of energy, a lot of spending a lot of time doing this. It can be very combative, but it's just a lot. It's just a lot right here, guys. A lot of fifth house stuff. So I think this can be a very, very fun late spring, early summer for you guys. But then that leads us to May 25th, and this is when Jupiter ingresses into Gemini. Now it's going into your 7th house of relationships, partners, your spouse, and any other significant individual. Now, why this is important is because Jupiter is your ruling planet. Your ascendant ruler is going to be in your 7th house, so there will be a major relationship involved here. Now, if you're like in a committed marriage already and you love each other, that's all good. You are going to be spending more time focusing on your spouse, focusing on your partner. Like they will take up more of your time and energy. Jupiter, when it goes into Gemini, is going to be in its sign of detriment, meaning it's not doing all that good. Jupiter likes to be in Sag and Pisces, and this is the exact opposite. So Jupiter and Gemini is trying to juggle here. Jupiter and Gemini is trying to do two things. But as we go throughout the year and we hit that Jupiter-Saturn square, which is August and December, that's when we'll kind of figure out what the problems are and work out the solutions. For right now, this is just the opportunity. And so what I want you to think about is summer of 2012. Summer of 2012, that was the last time Jupiter was in Gemini. What was going on with relationships for you? What was going on with living situation for you? Because this is not only your ascendant ruler in the 7th house, where there's a big part of you that is focused on relationships, but it's also your 4th ruler of home and family and living situation focused on relationships, maybe moving in with a partner, maybe living situation stuff based with a partner. Like you'd have to like kind of like read more into that. But think about 2012, because that was the last time Jupiter was in Gemini. Think about what was going on with relationships for you back then, because this will be very, very similar. We get to June, and June just continues this whole 7th house shenanigans. We get the Venus Cazimi in Gemini on June 4th. And again, this is in your 7th house of relationships, partners, spouses, individuals. So just like Venus goes retrograde in the same sign every 8 years, Venus goes Cazimi on the exterior conjunction every 8 years in the same exact sign. So the last time we had a Venus Cazimi in this part of the sky was in June of 2016. Now think about June of 2016 and what was going on for you, specifically related to friends and also work, routine, coworkers, health, and habits. So crazy story. My Venus is at about 18 Gemini, and in 2016, there was a Venus Cazimi at about 16 Gemini. I had just moved to Denver, and this was like before I really knew, like I didn't see this coming astrology-wise. I wasn't paying attention that closely. But I just moved to Denver, and I somehow got a job. I was 19, checking IDs at a bar. That's a long story, but I just got there like less than a month before. I had got this job, and on that Cazimi is when I became friends with like all of the bartenders, the security guards, and like one of them, a guy that I met there, still a really good close friend of mine today. And I just met this whole new group of people. And Venus rules my 11th house of friends and 6th house of like coworkers, and it like made a conjunction the 7th house of like individuals. So I literally made like a whole new set of friends. That's just in my opinion, it's like such a good example of like Venus Cazimi and Gemini. Like it is your 11th house ruler of friends conjoining in the 7th house. So this seems like a new restart with friendships regarding a specific individual. Same thing with 6th house of work, health, routines, pets, coworkers. There's some sort of a relationship starting there. Maybe it's for fun. Maybe it is for romance. But look at this. Like when this is happening, Jupiter is now in Gemini. We have the Venus Cazimi in Gemini. And then Mercury enters Gemini, is going to conjoin Jupiter. So your 7th ruler is conjoining your ascendant ruler. There's a lot of relationship stuff focused right here at June of 2024. So keep that all in mind. Now, we get to June 8th. This is when Mars is going to ingress into Taurus, and it's going to enter your 6th house of work, health, pets, routines, day-to-day activities. And this is when the momentum really slows down, which I don't necessarily think is the worst thing, because it's been a very intense time up until this point. But the last time Mars was in Taurus was between about July and August of 2022. Try to think about what was going on that time for you for health, habits, routines, day-to-day activities. Was there a big slowdown? Was there a lot of frustration? Was there a lot of not moving forward? It's your 12th house ruler of self-sabotage, isolation, alienation, and it was in detriment in your 6th house. So it's like you had your own bullshit subconscious beliefs getting in your own way of like your workload. Same thing with 5th house. So love, romance, sex, pleasure, that's going into detriment into your 6th house. So it's like not having as much creative energy, not wanting to move forward with these things as much at all. So things just really slow down right here. Maybe even problems with health, maybe getting sick, maybe getting injured, something along those lines here. But again, this is June, and it's like what, from January to June, it's just go, 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 go anyway. But then we get to the 14th of June and we have the Mercury Cazimi again, more 7th house stuff, but now it's your 7th ruler of relationships going Cazimi. So this is restarting that whole new story with relationships and partners and spouse and a significant individual. Now, again, if you are already married and you're not single, this should be really good for your partner. It just sounds like your partner's got a lot of shit going on, and you would probably also be making friends during this time. Or if your work involves like working with clients or other individuals, this should be really good for that as well. But the Mercury Cazimi is like just more of it. Like we get Jupiter going into your 7th, and then Mercury, Venus Cazimi, and then Mercury Cazimi. It's like all the 7th house stuff is getting really refreshed and revitalized. It's breathing some air starting in June. And then once we get to June 30th, this is when Saturn stations retrograde. And again, it's still in your 4th house of home and family, living situation, and parents. Now, like I said before, Saturn being direct and moving forward is like, here are your new responsibilities. Here's what you have to be disciplined about. Here's where you need to grow up and be mature. Here are the limitations and the restrictions you must deal with. Now, as Saturn goes retrograde, the way I've been explaining this for pretty much every zodiac sign has been Saturn being direct is like doing classwork, like you were in a classroom setting. But then Saturn retrograde is doing that work in the field, doing that work in real life. And you will see the problems. You will understand like, hey, what is going to work and what's not going to work, because everything's easier in a classroom setting. So as Saturn goes retrograde, at this point, it's like, all right, you know what you're responsible over when it comes to, again, living situation, home, family, parents, related to money, related to siblings, neighbors, and short distance travel. Saturn going retrograde is like, okay, now I need to like actually be able to apply this in real life. Even though it might make sense in a classroom setting, this is like, I know what I have to do, and now I have to like actually like do the thing. And we will be there for a while. So then we get to July, and honestly, January through June is like the most intense time of this year when all the action is happening. Then we get to July, things really start to slow down a little bit. They're not as action-packed. However, I mean, there's still stuff to talk about. I mean, the first thing that we've got going on is Mars conjoining Uranus on July 15th. This is also in your 6th house of work, health, pets, routines, coworkers, day-to-day activities. Now, we had a Mars-Uranus conjunction in 2022. I want you to think about what was going on August 1st of 2022. This was the last time we had a Mars-Uranus conjunction. This is like a major unstable event happening. Mars rules your 12th house of hidden enemies, self-sabotage, repressed, unacknowledged parts of yourself, and it's in detriment in your 6th house of work, labor, health, routines. It's also your 5th ruler of love, romance, sex, pleasure in your 6th house of work and routines, and it's conjoining Uranus, where it's like things were already slow, things were already kind of bad, you were kind of lazy, but then Mars conjoins Uranus and just everything gets unstable. There's a lot of chaotic energy going on with your, just low energy, your work, a lot of unexpected events or downfalls related to health, work, and routine and stuff like that. So it will be a challenging time in that area for you. So that happens. Think about August 1st, 2022, what was going on then, because that was the last time we had a Mars-Uranus conjunction in Taurus. And so, there we go. Then we get to July 16th, the next day, and Mercury is going to enter shadow. So we will have another Mercury retrograde, but this time it will be both in Leo and in Virgo. So Mercury will enter shadow in your 9th house of spirituality, religion, education, and far distance travel. The 9th house also rules publishing, broadcasting, social media, and Mercury rules your 10th house of career in your 7th house of relationships. And it's going to enter shadow in your 9th house again of like beliefs and far distance travel and social media. So there's going to be something that happens here, whether it's like you learn something, you're being more spiritually inclined, you're thinking about your beliefs, you're thinking about your worldview, you're thinking about traveling or social media or publishing, broadcasting. Something's going to come up here that will eventually make you make changes with your career and work, and we'll talk about that. But just pay attention to this because this will give you kind of key insight as to what the Mercury retrograde will be about. Then on July 20th is when Mars goes into Gemini. This is now entering your 7th house of relationships, partners, spouse, individual. This is when, the fun runs out a little bit. And so as Mars enters Gemini, the last time we had Mars in Gemini was between September of 2022 and March of 2023. Mars retrograded in Gemini, which in my opinion is way worse than just Mars transiting through Gemini. But think about what was going on in relationships for you between September, October of 2022, all the way to March of 2023. This will be a very similar revisit. But there's more to come with this. This is not the end all be all. There's a lot more to go. And then we get to August. So August gets interesting because number one, we have this Mercury retrograde that happens on August 5th. This is stationing retrograde, like I said, in your 10th house of career, reputation, legacy. So the big thing with this is Mercury, not only, it literally rules your 10th house of career and it rules your 7th house of relationships. And there seems to be something changing along these things, like some sort of, again, delay, miscommunication, a rethinking or a revisiting of your career, also related to publishing, broadcasting, spirituality, beliefs, far distance travel, and relationships related to those things. So that's kind of an underlying bigger deal thing that's going on here. I don't think this is the biggest Mercury retrograde this year. You'll see why, but I do think that this will be important. But that leads us to our next thing, which is Mars conjoining Jupiter on August 14th. So Mars conjoins Jupiter, again, 7th house stuff. Here's the problem. Jupiter is in detriment in your 7th house. There is like trying to have your cake and eat it too. There is a lot of, and Jupiter and Gemini is like trying to do two things in relationships, trying to do this and trying to do that. And, you are literally at detriment for a relationship. And Mars conjoining Jupiter is just that falling apart. It is explosive. It's your 12th ruler of hidden enemies conjoining your ascendant ruler in the 7th. So like maybe even some self-sabotage or someone breaks up with you, or at the minimum, a fight or a conflict related to the relationship. Also too, like your 7th ruler's retrograde, the moon's going to be opposite of here. There's a lot of, problems with this, but it's one of those things where Jupiter's in detriment, and from Jupiter moving into Gemini to this point is like, hey, there's this opportunity. There's these great new things happening in relationships, but it's not perfect. And Mars conjoining Jupiter is like, hey, if you're trying to balance these things, like you're going to get knocked off, your high horse. There's going to be some sort of explosive event where it's not going to be as easy to do both of these things. And this is what's important, is this Mars-Jupiter conjunction tees us up for 5 days later on August 19th for the Jupiter-Saturn square. Jupiter's in your 7th house of relationships and Saturn's in your 4th house of home and family. Now, here's the thing. Jupiter, let's get to that. So we get to August 19th. Saturn is in the sign of Pisces, so it's ruled by Jupiter. So there's a lot of, again, Saturn and Pisces. There's responsibility, restrictions, and discipline with home and family. And your 4th ruler, Jupiter, is in detriment in the 7th house. So there's like some sort of like opportunity with relationships and living situation thing here. But the thing is, Jupiter's trying to make the best of both worlds. And as this square happens and Saturn's retrograde, where you're like doing the field work of what you have to be responsible for, this is when you go like, oh, like this isn't going to fucking work. Like this is a lot more than I bargained for. This is going to be a lot harder to take on than I anticipated. And you don't have to think of a solution at this moment. That's for December. December is when you're really going to see all of that kind of change. But I think it's at this moment where you're like, okay, like in order for me to be responsible and do all the work here, like that might involve me not being able to take all the opportunities I can within a relationship, or maybe I need to see the relationship in a different light. So we'll talk about that as we move on. We get to September. September's pretty boring. Pluto goes into Capricorn on September 1st. Back to 2nd house, money, possessions. Been there for the past 16 years. Home sweet home almost. And this will be the last time Pluto goes into Capricorn, so enjoy it. Venus conjoins the South Node. Venus will be in Libra, and this will happen on September 3rd. And this will be in your 11th house of friends, networks, and communities. So we got a Venus South Node conjunction in late November of 2023. And I want you to think about like the South Node also brings things from the past. So this might be bringing a friend up from the past, but have friendships and community been draining and exhausting? And Venus conjoining the South Node is very like, I like this is a nice thing. There's nothing wrong with it. I just don't like it anymore. So Venus just conjoining the South Node is like, yeah, you've got good friends. They're nice people, but there's something low energy about it. There's something that's not enjoyable. Same thing with like work, coworkers, health, routines. There's something that's just draining and exhausting about it. That's just like, this is nice. It's not that it's bad. It's just that it doesn't pleasure me anymore. It's not fun for me anymore. And so there's this like lack of fun happening here. But then we get to September 4th, the next day, and this is when Mars enters Cancer. It's going into your 8th house of other people's money, death, debt, inheritance, things of that nature. So this is where I personally, as a Sag rising, I'm not looking forward to Mars in my fucking 8th for a long time because Mars is going to retrograde here. So get ready and just know if you're suffering, I'm suffering with you, but suffering is optional. Mars goes into Cancer. Mars rules your 12th house again of isolation, alienation, hidden enemies, self-sabotage, and it's going to be fallen in Cancer. Mars is about fights and conflicts, inflammation, and it's fallen. It's in the sign of Cancer, where it rules babies and nurturing and protecting. So Mars doesn't do all that well here. So Mars in Cancer is like burning things up, having to play defense with the 8th house of other people's resources, taxes, inheritance, debt, death. It also rules your 5th house of love, romance, sex, pleasure, and children, and art and music. And there's something about this that's like uncomfortable and, not as enjoyable, and you're more defensive and you're more crabby. The last time we had Mars in Cancer was about April of 2020, 2023 to like the beginning of May of 2023. And I want to know how you felt during that time. What issues were you dealing with when it came to other people's resources, shared resources? This might even involve living situation, because if you're like me and you have the midheaven in Libra, you might have the IC in Aries, so Mars can control topics around living situation. But this is just like when problems arise related to other people's resources, okay? And we'll talk more about that as we go on. We get to October, and we get back to eclipse season. We have the solar eclipse in Libra on October 2nd. Again, this is your 11th house of friends, networks, and communities. It might have to deal with career topics if your midheaven is there, like mine. But this is kind of coming back to what was going on last October of 2023. What shifted for you career-wise or friendship-wise around that October 12th, 13th, 14th time? This is kind of like a ending of friendships, a moving on from friendships, or an identity. Your 11th ruler is also in detriment in the 12th. So I think you're just going to be spending more time alone, a little bit jaded during this time. But that's, again, like, this is also not only bringing up stuff from October 14th of 2023, but also March 25th of 2024. A lot of friendship changes happening for you here, where you're, again, over June and July, you're making a lot of new friends. But throughout this year in general, you're moving on from some friendships, some certain communities. Then we get to October 4th, and that's when Mars moves into shadow. God, I'm not looking forward to this, to be honest with you guys. Mars will retrograde, and once it enters shadow in your 8th house of other people's money, death, and debt, I'd pay attention to this day, because there's something about this day that is going to happen that is going to become very relevant for when Mars comes back to that degree in March of 2025. So like, this might be handling debt. It's what it's like for me. I have like some taxes to get back on. That's what I plan on doing all this for, is just handling all my fucking taxes and shit like that. This can be handling debt. This can be handling even like if you got, a child support, 5th ruler fallen in the 8th. But Mars will enter shadow, and there is definitely some sort of like issue that comes up here that will become very relevant by March of 2025. So pay attention to this. And again, feeling crabby, feeling, insecure, feeling combative and defensive. That's kind of the vibe. Then Jupiter stations retrograde on October 9th. Again, this is your 7th house of relationships, partner, spouse, individual. And as Jupiter was direct and was moving forward, there was all of these like opportunities with relationships and, you know, all of this abundance and fortune with relationships, although it was like you are at detriment to this person. Jupiter going retrograde is just kind of like, you know, it's easy to have faith when everything's going your way, but when it's not, like, do you still have faith? Are you still grateful? And Jupiter going retrograde is, you know, Jupiter expanded your 7th house, right? It showed you all these new things. And as Jupiter goes retrograde, that stops. Like, you have to work with what you have. And another way that I look at this is same thing, the Saturn retrograde stuff, where Jupiter being direct is like doing classroom work, and then Jupiter going retrograde is like doing the field work, where it's like, okay, something might make sense on paper, but that's never how it is in reality. So you've got to go out there and experience it. And so this is going to be a slowdown in relationships, a reflection and a reviewing of relationships, a, you know, really thinking deeply about like, okay, what do I want? What am I doing here? Especially related to home and family and living situation. Okay. And then I messed up on this. The next transit we have is October 17th. It's technically not a lunar eclipse in Aries. I thought it was, but you know what? Because there's like, a prenumeral eclipse or like the beginning of eclipses in Virgo and Pisces. And I don't care about it because there's so much that happens with that Virgo Pisces axis, like right as we start 2025, that I'll talk about it in 2025. But maybe this is an eclipse, but I still think this is a very important lunation because it's in your 5th house. So it rules creativity, love, children, romance, hobbies, stuff like that. And we just had all of this action here, right? Like, this is all stuff that's been very relevant. And it's, again, this full moon in your 5th house, love, romance, sex, pleasure. What do you want? What do you enjoy? And the moon is ruled by Mars. And where's Mars? In the sign of the moon. So there's this big look at like, what do I want? Love, romance, sex, pleasure, children. The ruler of that is in the 8th house of, you know, shared resources, debts, death, other people's money. There's some sort of like crabbiness and defensiveness that's going on here. And the sun's in Libra, your willpower is a little bit weak here. And there's just this kind of like a big illumination of like, I still need to pursue what I want to pursue, even though these problems with it are happening. And again, 2024 is a build up to 2025. Like, this isn't just like, oh, and we end. 2024 is a build up to 2025. That brings us to November. Mars goes into Leo on November 3rd. I'm not going to lie, for the majority of you, I like this. For me personally, I don't. You will know one day. But Mars is going to go in your 9th house of spirituality and religion and education, far distance travel. So what is nice about Mars going into Leo is it's not in Cancer anymore. It is at least in a fire sign. It is a little bit more alive, is a little bit more alert. However, the issue is Mars is still in shadow and it will go retrograde. So as Mars is in Leo, Mars in Leo is about being confident, about being brave, being courageous, saying shit with your chest. And it's Mars in your 9th house of spirituality, religion, astrology, publishing, broadcasting, social media. And so there's going to be some more fights and conflicts in this area, especially related to 5th house things. So love, romance, sex, pleasure, art, music, recreation. And also 12th house of like hidden enemies bringing up this stuff. So Mars will go in there. And I think, again, on one level, you will feel better because Mars is no longer in Cancer, but that's very short-lived. Then on November 7th, Mercury enters shadow. Mercury will go retrograde in your 1st house of you, your body, yourself, your image, your identity. Personally, I think this is the funniest Mercury retrograde this year, and I'm going to explain why. But Mercury, again, rules your 7th house. It's in detriment in your 1st house of yourself. So there's a big thing with relationships. And it's your 10th house of career, retrograde in your 1st house of yourself. You might say something stupid. You might fuck something up. You might need to rearrange your identity and, you know, reconstruct things in your head to see like who the hell you are. Pluto enters Aquarius on November 19th. Back to the 3rd house, it is staying. And what's important about this, in my opinion, is from this day, November 17th, all the way to July of 2025, every major planet is moving into a new zodiac sign. So Pluto will move into Aquarius, Neptune will move into Aries, Uranus will move into Gemini, and then, sorry, this is my like 9th horoscope. I'm messing up here. Saturn moves into Aries, and then Jupiter moves into Cancer. So there's a lot of big shifts on like the macro cosmic level that start right here. This is the beginning of it. Then After that, Saturn stations direct on the 15th. I should actually say right before that, Saturn stations direct, because I know this is the 17th and the 19th and 15th. But anyway, Saturn stations direct in your 4th house of home and family. Now you know what you have to be responsible for. Now you know what your duties and your obligations are regarding money, regarding local area, local community, short distance travel. It's like, okay, now I know what is mine to do. Now I know what I'm responsible for, and I feel more comfortable doing it. So I think that's exciting. But then Mercury stations retrograde on the 25th, again in your 1st house. Let's just take a quick gander at this Mercury retrograde, because to me, it's so funny. Yes, it's going to be like, not the funnest thing ever, especially for like my chart, but God, is it a funny Mercury retrograde. And this is why. Mercury rules over your 7th house of relationships, and it's in detriment in your 1st house of you. Well, your 1st house ruler of you, Jupiter, is in detriment in your 7th house of relationships. And Mercury's going to retrograde opposite Jupiter. So there's this big kind of like I'm at detriment with you and you're at detriment with me, and we don't know what we are and what do we need to talk about. Like that's kind of the deal here. It's really weird, but it's really funny. I find the humor in it personally. Maybe you won't, but this is all this relationship stuff that has to happen. This is this big relationship talk, which that leads us to December. On December 6th, Mars stations retrograde in your 9th house of spirituality, religion, far distance travel, higher education, publishing, broadcasting, social media. Here's the deal. This is like, the cowardly lion. This is like having your tail between your legs. This is all bite, no bark, or all bark, no bite. This is a loss of like a reframing and a slowdown of energy when it comes to your beliefs. It's a reframing of your 5th house of, again, recreation, creativity, love, romance, sex, pleasure, art, music, recreation, and what your beliefs are about it, how you put that out into the world. It's also your 12th ruler of self-sabotage and, your subconscious and fears and phobias going retrograde in the 9th, where there's just like a lot of like, again, stage fright. There's a lot of insecurity coming up, having your tail tucked between your legs. And so this is kind of like, running up and then losing that, losing the balls to it. So this is kind of like, again, it's all bark, no bite. And it's like right when you're like ready to like, be confident out there, Mars goes retrograde, where it's like you just lose that. Like it's almost like Mars retrograde in Leo is almost embarrassing. Then Mercury stations direct by the 16th. Again, all of this is relationship stuff for you guys related to you and what you're doing. But then on New Year's Eve, we get Jupiter squaring Saturn. This is the second one. Again, still 7th house, 4th house. But here's the deal. The first time that we had this happen, let's do this. The first time that this happened, Jupiter was direct and Saturn was retrograde. Versus this time, Jupiter is retrograde and Saturn is direct. So like I said before, in August, it was kind of like, oh, like, I have these opportunities and things I can do, but I have to be responsible with these things, and I'm not sure how to do it. Like clearly this is going to be an issue. Now with Saturn being direct, you know what you're responsible for. You know what you have to do with the home and the family and the living situation. And as that squares Jupiter in your 7th, it's like, I have to consolidate this relationship stuff. I have to not take up as many opportunities or give all my time and energy away to relationships in order to maintain the level of, sorry, I have my iPad I'm drawing on, and sometimes my mouse comes down into the iPad and gets stuck. But it's like, I have to consolidate this. Like, I have to slow down in this area in order to be more responsible. I can't take every opportunity here because I have to do what I have to do. And that's how we end the year, guys. That's going to build us up into 2025, where we have so many changes. So like I said before, like this video if you're enjoying it, subscribe to keep updated with every major transit that's going on through 2024. Comment below. Let me know what month you're looking forward to, what month you're not looking forward to, or any predictions for yourself of what the year might entail for you. As well, don't forget to get the transit calendar for your phone, both for iPhone and for Google Calendar. And feel free to book a consultation if you really want to go in deep with your chart. So with that being said, I love and appreciate you guys, and I'll be seeing you next time.